I like JJK. I've praised it and criticized it, but in my recent video, I seem to have gotten stuff wrong, and I have no problem admitting that. Let's go over each point, but first, I'm going to establish my rules. Number 1. New magic in a magic system must be foreshadowed. I have this rule for all stories. If a story is going to use a new ability, it should be foreshadowed to show that the writer isn't making stuff up on the spot. Imagine you're playing a card game with someone and they explain the rules, but then they start breaking the rules and telling you that those were extra rules that they forgot to tell you. That breaks your immersion or investment in the game. Same thing with stories. If a writer starts making up new rules, it shatters my suspension of disbelief and my investment in the story. If the main characters are ever in trouble, how do I know the writer won't make something up to save them? The lack of internal consistency breaks immersion. The main way to foreshadow is through exposition and dialogue. It can also be done by showing the ability before it is important. Number 2. Magic must be intuitive. If it's not foreshadowed, it can be intuitive. Let me give some examples. In Gojo, Josuke has the ability to fix things, and we've seen it used in many ways in the first episodes and chapters. So if he breaks concrete floor and fixes it into a wall, that's intuitive. In World Trigger, there's a move that can summon walls from any substance the user is touching. So when Kyusei summons a wall from his opponent's body, it's intuitive. They never said that people were exempt from wall summonings. Now, JJK. Gojo healing is technique. The appliance metaphor still makes no sense, but this is overridden in 230. In that chapter, Sukuna explains that curse techniques are around the right prefrontal cortex, and that Gojo was destroying and then healing that part to reset his technique. This is like if you work out your right arm, it eventually gets tired. Gojo is cutting off his arm and healing it, but the reason it takes time is because the brain isn't easy to heal. That fixes my issue with the metaphor, but there's still a foreshadowing problem. This idea wasn't set up before it was used. It was explained after, but there's a potential counter to this. In chapter 76, Gojo says that he has his CT on at all times. Someone says that'll fry his brain, but he responds by saying that he has RCT on at all times to preserve himself and keep his brain fresh. Okay, so in 76, Gojo is frying his brain, but healing it 24/7, and there are no side effects. Question 1. Why has Gojo's technique never burned out before? Is it only red and domains that can burn out? In 226, Yuta says he used RCT to heal his burned out technique, not his domain or tech reversal. So shouldn't Gojo be burning out multiple times a day? Since this is curse technique that's active 24/7, that would mean that the right prefrontal cortex is being fried, right? Question 2. Why is healing his brain now a problem? In 76, he says he uses RCT around the clock to keep his brain fresh. Here, there's a slight difference because he's intentionally destroying his brain, then healing it. But it should still be the same area of the brain that's being healed and damaged. Ieri even said, "I thought Gojo was used to healing his brain." So did I. This could potentially be explained by the brain being pushed harder because of the reversals and domains. Maybe he's damaging his brain more than usual, and he's not healing it back properly because of the difficulty of healing the cortex, which puts it in a worse state compared to the state his brain is normally at when he just has limitless 24/7. Maybe DE and CTR strain the cortex more than using CT. That's just a theory though. With how much the spectators talk, you'd think the story would confirm this if this was a fact. Next is the reversed barrier. The explanations I've heard mostly make sense. Barriers are weak on the outside and strong on the inside. Gojo reversed this in 227. The concept on its own is fine. The explanation is what bothered me. They said internal and external conditions. I understood that barriers were weak on the outside, but the wording of conditions in 227 made it sound like this was a choice. Furthermore, in 228, Kusakabe says, quote, "It takes time for every sorcerer to eventually hit on the precise blend of external and internal conditions, volume, and construction speed for barriers." End quote. This not only makes conditions sound like a choice, but it makes it sound like there are multiple conditions. To my knowledge, barriers being weak on the outside isn't a choice, it's just a natural limitation. Again, the idea is fine, the explanation is just poor. If they said Gojo reversed the barrier so that it was strong outside and weak inside, I'd have no issue. Like I said in the video, I like the attempt, but the execution is sloppy. Also, if the barrier was weak on the outside, why couldn't Sukuna just destroy it from the inside instead of the trade-off? That's not a major issue because Sukuna still destroyed it anyway. I already explained how Unlimited Void never had a weakness until now in the video. I even pulled up sources and proof. My main argument is that no one has ever been freed from Unlimited Void's sure hit against Gojo's will. In this fight, Sukuna freed himself from the sure hit against Gojo's will. Tiny barrier. I already explained that shrinking the barrier smaller than your mass would not be intuitive. However, I'm willing to say that it was half intuitive because inside a barrier, the world seems vast and you can't see the edges. But there's not a clear line from massive world inside the barrier to making a barrier smaller than my body. I'll give it a half point. I also corrected myself with the image showing that a tiny barrier should theoretically make it stronger in 228. Gojo harming Sukuna. Because the tiny barrier was harder to break, it gave Gojo more time to fight Sukuna, and since he's the better fighter, he damaged Sukuna enough to break his domain. I understand that much. My lingering question is what attack did Gojo use to harm Sukuna so much that his domain broke? Gojo hit Sukuna with a red at the end of 226, but the shrine didn't fall. Sukuna was looking like Two-Face, but his domain was still up. In 227, Gojo hit Sukuna with a clean punch, but the domain was still up. But then in 228, Gojo hits Sukuna with a mysterious attack and the domain goes down. It definitely wasn't purple, and I don't think it was red. In 229, a punch from Gojo ruined Sukuna's face and broke his domain again, and the punch on the defenseless Sukuna after UV made a hole in his chest. Gojo is the better fighter, I get that, but if he was always this superior, why didn't he wash Sukuna before the first domain in 224, or after his first domain broke in 226 and 227? You could argue that he was struggling in Sukuna's domain because healing while fighting is difficult, but so was using domain expansion and amplification at the same time, and that's what Sukuna was doing. It kinda seems like Gojo suddenly got better. If anyone has a good explanation, I'm all ears. I also corrected myself about the 3 minutes thing in the video by showing a panel of Mei saying that the last battle was 3 minutes. Repairing CT causing Sukuna to lag was a new rule that was just added as it was being used. I stand by that. In chapter 217, Sukuna summons Maharaga's wheel above his head. He also summons Maharaga to break Yorozu's domain in 218, so the burden was visually foreshadowed. That's my fault. But placing the burden on Megumi's soul inside of Sukuna was not intuitive or foreshadowed. Based on the way it was used, it would seem like the user of Maharaga can adapt for Maharaga while he isn't summoned. Okay, putting the burden on a second soul within you is not intuitive, at least not to me, or foreshadowed. Maybe it's because Megumi can also use 10 shadows, so he can also shoulder the burden. Sukuna explains it by saying that he was using 10 shadows to use Megumi's soul, which is why he couldn't use his technique. That's a little shaky, but I will let it go because I like the trade-off of not being able to use his own tech while letting Megumi take the burden. Blue punches. This is such a minor criticism, but I still don't think it makes sense. Imagine you are standing against a flat wall. If the wall starts sucking you in, it's not gonna hurt because you're already on the wall. If the wall pushes you back, that could hurt. Now, if you're standing a couple feet away from the wall and it sucks you in, that'll hurt because you'll slam into the wall. If it pushes you away, that could hurt, but probably not as much as compared to attracting you from a distance. That metaphor is the moment of impact. Like I said, if blue attracted right before the moment of impact, that would make sense. But that's not what the story said. Kuzukabe said at the moment of contact in 231. That's like the wall that's already touching you, pulling you in. It will increase the damage. The real darkening was just added in this fight. If Gojo had been beating up Sukuna with blue, why wouldn't Maharaga have adapted to blue sooner? Why would he have needed to dodge the blue that hit Akito? I don't know. Gojo had been using it since 231 at least, because that's when they mention it. Sukuna already had the wheel out by then. In that chapter, he drags Sukuna, crushes him with blue, kicks him, causing the wheel to darken, gets his punch caught, and pulls a traffic light at Sukuna. In 231, he elbows Sukuna, kicks him back, and hits him with Black Flash. In 233, he punches Maharaga and then pushes him. If Gojo indirectly hitting Maho with red once allowed him to tank a red, why hasn't he already adapted to blue after all these hits? Even if you want to discount some of those attacks, there are 10 total. If you take away half, that's still 5 blue attacks that landed. The reason this matters is because he dodged a blue in 234, which killed Agito. If Maharaga tanked it, Agito could have still helped. Maybe it was a bad judgment. That's just a theory though. Sukuna defending with amplification and still getting hurt is still shaky. Amplification counters curses. Maybe red is just so powerful that amp can't fully negate it, but that just sounds like Gojo being above the rules. If amplification couldn't fully negate any lapses or reversals, this could have been foreshadowed. Someone compared this to Gojo using Falling Blossom Emotion and still getting hit in 227. I'd counter with Gojo using Simple Domain and not getting hit in 226. Maybe because Falling Blossom and amplification can't be stripped away while Simple Domain can, they have the imperfect defense as a weakness. I could accept this, but again, I'm having to do the work to fully explain the abilities. The red hitting twice still doesn't make sense. I'm adding a new criticism. When Gojo used red before this, it was like launching a bomb and exploding it. In 74, we don't even see it, it just blows Toji back. In 0.4, it explodes on a monster's head. In 14, it knocks Joko back. In 226, it launched Sukuna back. So red being able to still exist after hitting Sukuna once is not intuitive or foreshadowed. Now the logic of the attack. It hit him in the arms and somehow flew around Sukuna without him seeing it. Someone tried to use the rubble blinding him as an excuse, but I don't buy it. The red hit the rubble before it hit Sukuna, so if Sukuna could see it well enough to lift his arms and block it, then why wouldn't he be able to see it fly around him? You have to lower your suspension of disbelief to buy that. Black Flash restoring your cursed energy still doesn't make sense and was neither foreshadowed or intuitive. Someone tried to use the excuse of Black Flash making you operate at 120% of your max potential, but what does that have to do with restoring your depleted energy? Sukuna using Max Elephant without summoning it was not foreshadowed or intuitive. Someone tried to use the barrierless domain as a comparison. That's not the same. Domain expansions were explained by making a barrier and putting your curse into it. Putting your curse into the air without a barrier is somewhat intuitive. Using the powers of a Shikigami without summoning it is not intuitive at all. This is a minor criticism that doesn't really affect the fight much though. I also take back what I said about blue being intuitive. The orb still existing after hitting its target isn't intuitive. Furthermore, Gojo using chance to reactivate his blue was not foreshadowed or intuitive. Sucking in a projectile from a distance also wasn't foreshadowed or intuitive. Someone said it was max output and that he did the same thing against Toji. No, against Toji in 71, the max output was a giant ball that sucked in only what it touched. The tiny ball sucking from a distance was not foreshadowed, and chanting reactivating a power wasn't either. Finally, Gojo being less harmed by purple because it was his own cursed energy was not foreshadowed or intuitive. In conclusion, I definitely made mistakes, but some of the exposition is not good enough and relies on the audience to theorize to fill in the blanks, like the reversed barrier and healing the brain. A good magic system doesn't force you to fill in the blanks for it. With all of the talking the spectators do, why can't they fill in those blanks? In fact, they explain some abilities very well, like Falling Blossom and Simple Domain. But when the story doesn't explain the abilities well, it's suddenly my fault for not doing Gege's work. Also, some of the explanations are confusing, like the reverse barrier again, and some of the abilities aren't foreshadowed or intuitive, like using Max Elephant without summoning it. Some people were saying that the fight wasn't complicated. The fact that we have to go through hundreds of chapters to find moments that set up this fight, and the fact that we can discuss it this much says otherwise. I don't think this fight is horrible anymore, I just think it's mediocre and poorly explained. There were chapters of build up to this fight that could have set up everything. In chapter 222, Yuji and Kusakabe are training, but people theorized that they swapped souls. If this is true, and this is Yuji's technique, this would have been a perfect moment for Kusakabe to talk about curse techniques being in the prefrontal cortex because Yuji just got his CT. Gojo could have had an inner monologue about his various weakness in this chapter. Sukuna could have had an inner monologue about using the 10 shadows without summoning them. I'm gonna let my buddy Daffy talk about the fight to even out the takes. He's been making vids on JJK and 5 of them were unjustly blocked, so I want to help him recover his loss a little. Check out his channel if you want more positive takes on JJK.
Yo! So the Gojo versus Sukuna fight has been going on for about around 11 to 12 chapters at this point, and a lot of people have varying opinions on it. The fight's even good if it's drawn out. I personally think that it's actually at a fine length. I mean, these are supposedly the 2 strongest sorcerers in jujutsu history, so if the chapter is only, their fight was only 7 to 8 chapters, I would feel a little underwhelmed. I do feel like there was a little fluff, not a little fluff, I think there was way more fluff than necessary with a lot of stuff explaining like these domain expansions, like Kusakabe kind of explaining all this stuff. I definitely feel like the domain expansion thing was kind of played out a little bit, but overall I am enjoying the fight. The fight has not reached its conclusion yet, but I would like to see Sukuna kind of press back a little more. We haven't really seen any of his own personal techniques. I mean, he's heavily relied on the 10 shadows technique at this point, but he hasn't busted out again the black box or his four-armed form or anything like that. This is heavily relying on the 10 shadows technique and Megumi's being as a vessel. Like even when Gojo hit him with the his own domain expansion, he relied on Megumi's soul to tank that damage for him, for the majority of it at least. So I don't know, I definitely feel like Sukuna was on the back foot here. I mean, Gojo literally told him, don't forget you're the challenger here, and it definitely felt like that. Obviously, in my personal opinion, I feel like Gojo's gonna die at the end of this fight, possibly at the risk of his own life to save Megumi's soul or something like that, but I don't know, we'll see. But yeah, that's just my quick thoughts. I'm out, peace.
Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, and help me revolutionize the manga industry by buying my manga and spreading the word. All important links will be in the description.